Good morning, everybody. Happy Easter. Jesus is risen. He is risen indeed. Imagine you received a letter sent certified mail from a big law firm in New York City. In the mail that day were a couple bills, maybe some political mailers, but wedged in between was this letter from this law firm. You opened it up to find on fancy letterhead the news that a long-distant relative of yours had died and had left you millions of dollars. You would rightly be skeptical. How could this be? But it looked so legit. It was mailed certified. And so you'd look into it, right? Why? Because the offer is too much. It's too great. If it were true that some long-distant, now deceased loved one had left you millions of dollars, that news, that reality would be life-changing for you. And so those skeptical, you would take a second look. Friends, the Christian message, the message of Easter, that Jesus is risen, is the same exact thing. If true, this message is life-changing, because it means that the worst thing is never the last thing. It means that there is a kind of love that outlives death, if it's true. Those who first received this message 2,000 years ago, the first hearers about an empty tomb, at first thought there was no way it could be. In Luke's account of the same gospel we've just heard, when the women come running back to the apostles, Jesus' closest friends, and they announce what had happened, that the tomb was empty, we hear that their story, they thought, sounded like nonsense, and they did not believe them. Why? Because ancient people knew just as well as we know now that there are no welcome home parties after you have laid a loved one to rest. They knew just as well as we do that death wins 100% of the time. Nobody was expecting nobody. But this news, if true, would be completely life-altering, completely life-changing. And so what does Peter do? He looks into it. Peter, at this point in the story, is experiencing what? Peter, just 2 days ago, denied knowing Jesus 3 times. And at this point in his life is steeped in regret and shame. At this point in Peter's life, he has lost all hope for his future. He had put all of his eggs in the basket of Jesus being who he said he is. But now it seems as though all of that is lost. But the news of a risen Jesus, the reality of an empty tomb, would not only offer Peter healing for his past, but hope for his future. And so he runs for himself to peek into the tomb. And when there, he saw with his own eyes no body. He saw the burial cloth neatly folded, and he smelt no scent of a decaying body. What was it that convinced Peter of the resurrection? It was not an eloquent argument. It was not a well-thought-out philosophy. It was not an idea or a nice sentiment. What convinced Peter, what convinced those first Christians, was that something had happened. Christianity lives or dies not on the value of an idea, but on the fact of a reality, the historical fact that something happened. That Jesus died, yes. Was buried, yes. But then that he rose again. And this event changes everything. C.S. Lewis, the great Christian author of the last century, said that if false, Christianity is of no importance. And if true, is of infinite importance. The one thing Christianity cannot be is of just mediocre importance. It cannot just be marginal important. Each and every one of us today has received the news, once again, of the empty tomb. Is it true? We could look into the archaeological data. We could try and corroborate all of the written texts. But the only piece of evidence I want us to think about this morning together is the reality that something changed in the life of Simon Peter. That when he rushed back from that empty tomb, he went from being a very weak man to being a very bold man. Peter went from being the one who denied knowing Jesus, that was the last we heard of him, to the very first word of Scripture we heard this morning was the name Peter. When in the Acts of the Apostles, Peter, now not shying away from knowing Jesus, is standing up boldly and proclaiming that Jesus Christ is risen. And what caused that change in him? It was the event. It was the reality of the empty tomb that changes everything. My friends, each one of us this morning is confronted with the same news once again. And the thing about news is that news is not supposed to tell you what to think or what to do. News is really, in a perfect world, just supposed to tell you what happened. And then you have to decide for yourself what to do with that. The news of the empty tomb for us can be the thing that you can build your entire life on. That the worst thing is never the last thing. That there is a kind of love that outlives death. Can be the thing that can hold the weight of your actual life. The thing about Jesus rising from the dead means that he is still alive. Which means that each one of us today is able to encounter him and the events and the person of Jesus risen from the dead in a new way. Jesus' resurrection is not simply about giving us a better way to die. It's about giving us a better way to live. To live a life more meaningfully. To live a life more full of love. To live a life knowing that nothing in this world has the final word. God always and will forever have the final word. That's the invitation of this Easter. That invitation does not come with the promise of a perfect or an easy life. But it does come with the promise of a life so full of meaning, you would actually want to live it forever. My friends, the tomb is empty. Let us go in and for ourselves see if there is truth to it, and then build our life on the truth that Jesus is risen.